Yeah,
Done.
because the bacteria prevents stuff from sticking to the pan.
I feel like if you were in like a James Bond film and they were interrogating you, Dad, the only way to do it is to like take your cast iron pan and just like douse it with dish soap. You're like,
No.
okay, I'll talk. Yeah.
So, welcome to episode 85 of Farm to Market. This is the show where participants get 5 minutes to state their opinions, and the person with the most time at the end wins, but there are no prizes. Today, we are talking about increased credit card debt, the S&P 500 decline, or an S&P 500 decline, AI bubbles, the Nickle Pickle, and cast iron pans. All right, consumers racked up $180 billion in new credit card debt in 2022, the largest amount of debt ever added in a single year, according to a recent study from personal finance website WalletHub. Nearly half of that total, almost $86 billion, was added in the fourth quarter of 2022, marking the biggest ever quarterly increase in credit card debt. Why is this happening, and how bad is this information?
Well, first of all, as far as why it's happening, there's a number of reasons. Even when you go back to the COVID / the early days of the Ukraine war, when prices for everything went through the roof, they've come back down, but they're not back anywhere close to the level they were 3-4 years ago. So people since then have been drawing on savings increasingly. And its spending on things is up, but until pretty recently, credit card debt had been growing, but not like this. What seems to be happening now is that combination of higher interest rates, more people carrying balances than there were before. People have run out of savings, in other words, and are starting to put everything on credit. As far as how bad this is, in and of itself, if it's just a short-term thing, it's not great, but it's not horrible. If it lasts for more than a couple of quarters, there's probably going to be some really bad things that are coming down the line. I've mentioned this before. There are a handful of areas in the economy where you really don't ever want to see debt pile up, and they're households, the banking and financial system, the non-banking and financial system, corporate world, and with governments. So debt piling up in any one of those four has the potential to blow up the whole economy if it gets big enough. But right now, in addition to households, we're seeing debt piling up in all four of those areas at basically record speed. So something really big is going to happen if very, very quickly people do not get their spending under control. What'll kick off a potential debt crisis, is anybody's guess. Could be a year from now, could be 3 years, who knows. But if people keep piling up debts like this, whether it's households, banks, the business world, or governments, at some point, something's going to have to give. And all of a sudden, you're going to start seeing a lot of people who can no longer pay their debts. And when that happens, you get really bad problems in the economy.
Alex said it well. It really doesn't take a forensics team to get to the bottom of this, why credit card debt is so high right now. You have bad economic conditions. And in times of economic downturns or uncertainty, people tend to rely more heavily on their credit cards to cover their expenses. They have higher overall credit card debt. Interest rates are high. So more of your credit card payments are going towards interest rates and less towards the principal. You have higher credit card balances. Inflation, just the cost of living is going up. So people are using their credit cards more. Inflation is outpacing rising incomes. So you have higher credit card debt. So yeah, it makes perfect sense why we have almost $1 trillion in consumer credit card debt right now. Is it bad? Absolutely. We recommend, don't use credit cards at all. Use your debit cards. They only encourage more spending, and going to debt is never a good thing. I think what will probably happen is if something has to break, the government's probably going to step in and start bailing people out or infusing the economy with more cash. So it's going to be this vicious cycle, and I don't like seeing it unfold.
One of the greatest causes of inequality in America is the ability to have credit when you ought not have it. And what ends up happening is that people grow to a level of lifestyle or quality of life they can't afford. And right now, credit card interest rates are in excess of 20%. let me say it again. Interest rates on credit cards, if you carry a balance, is in excess of 20%. What that means is that your credit card balance is going to double about every 3 to 4 years if you just make the minimum payments. And yet people continue to do it because they're accustomed to spending money. Secondly, is that we have a moral hazard, is that for the last 25 years, whenever a sufficient number of people act foolishly, the government comes in and bails them out, so that now they're tacitly believing that I could be dumb with my credit card and it's okay. I'll get bailed out at some point in the future. It's a recipe for disaster because I just don't know how much more the government, who's already 30 some odd trillion dollars in debt, how much more they can help.
Yeah, just looking at this, the average credit card debt per household in 2021 was $9,177, which is a lot to carry on your credit card, and then it increased to 9,990 in the fourth quarter of 2022. So, I mean, I guess I'm already concerned that there's people are carrying $9,000 on their credit card, because like the 800 and some odd dollars increase, is a lot. But I mean, when you're already talking about $9,000 to start with, I mean that's a lot. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know what the plan here is for for people doing this. I mean, do they intend to pay it off? Are they just waiting to like, oh well, if I get in trouble, the government will bail me out? Because I imagine there's quite a while before the government's like, all right, we're going to bail out all credit card holders. I mean, if I was a credit card holder who had $9,000 on there and no way to pay for it, I don't think I'd be holding my breath for something to happen in the next year or 2 years. I mean, at some point you're going to have to pay for it. So,
well, that's because you're financially successful, but there's a lot of people don't think like you, Tom.
Yeah, but are you going to wait? But there's a lot of people who are going to be like, okay, realistically, when is the government do you just keep piling debt on your credit card until?
Yes, that's what
you
do.
Do that. You got $20,000 on your credit card. And you're like, someday somebody's going to take care of this for me.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Then I'm concerned.
Yeah. The problem has to be so big that it's unsolvable unless somebody steps in. So that's what it'll get to.
Just wait till the college student loans have to start being paid back. Then you're really going to see credit card balances go through the roof.
Yeah. Because when's that? October?
I believe it's August, isn't it?
Is it August? Okay. Yeah. So that'll be something to watch. Okay.
And I'd just like to point out that $9,000 or $10,000. That's just the average. I don't own a single credit card, so someone out there has $20,000, and so it problem's a lot worse than what meets the eye.
Yeah, I think it's somebody in San Bernardino. Let's see here. Oh, Santa Clara. Somebody in Santa Clara. The average household credit card debt in Santa Clara, California, $19,715. There was 36% of people have more credit card debt than they do emergency savings. So that's terrifying.
This is deja vu all over again. This is exactly what it was like in the between 2000 and 2007. It was my wife and I. We taught lots of get out of debt seminars all through the valley, and I was shocked that in a strong economy, just how many people had $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in credit card debts.
Yeah, Billings, Montana, the average is just above 10,000. So I guess that's better than California.
I'll bet you Whitefish is even worse than that.
In California, though.
What's that?
I'll bet you Whitefish is worse.
Nah, I bet Whitefish has almost zero. It's not on here, number one, but I feel like the people who live in Whitefish are people who are paying cash for houses. Missoula, I did see Missoula on there somewhere, and they had some of the biggest increase in credit card debt. So, I'd say probably it's in Missoula, Bozeman area.
Well, just because you pay cash for your house doesn't mean you still run a credit card. I mean, just because you have credit card debt too doesn't mean you're destitute or financially irresponsible. Some people just have credit cards. They use them. Now this is the revolving balance, right?
Yeah. So it was a 7% increase in outstanding credit card debt. So yeah. So I'm not super concerned about just the increase in credit card debt, because maybe people are like, look, I want the points so I can go on my next Carnival cruise or Caribbean or whatever the cruise lines are. But this is this is outstanding credit card debt increased roughly by 7.1% during the fourth quarter, according to Wallet Hub.
Gotcha.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on. All right, yeah, we'll move on to the next question here. Hedge funds and other speculative investors have built up a big bet that the S&P 500 will decline, marking their most bearish position since 2007. At the same time, they are preparing for a rally in the technology-focused NASDAQ 100 index, with the net bullish wager in recent weeks approaching the highest level since late last year. Do you think they are right, and would the NASDAQ 100 severely outperform the S&P 500?
So in general, yeah, I think the NASDAQ this year is going to outperform the S&P in large, because I'm not sure what rally they're preparing for, because we're already in it. Tech has had a pretty good year so far, and this follows a down 2022. So yeah, I think tech is going to do pretty well this year. And we'll talk more about AI in a bit. I think there's an AI trade that's just getting started. Kicked off. We'll talk about it again in a minute with NVIDIA, but we're not just with AI, but we're starting to see more and more situations where tech companies are going to be required to sell their products to more and more businesses as older Americans retire and leave the workforce, and there aren't really enough younger people to replace them. So I think you're going to see more and more companies automating their work processes, and that's going to be good for tech in general as we continue to see baby boomers retire.
It's kind of like watching a horse race, and there's a horse that's just out in front by 100 feet, and people ask, hey, do you think that horse is going to win? It's like, well, yeah, it's got a pretty good chance of doing it. Like Alex said, it's already doing well so far, at least tech relative to the S&P 500. Is it going to continue to do well? I don't know, but it's up 33% relative to the S&P 500 being up like 12. So sure, it's positioned well. As long as it holds its own relative to the S&P 500, it will outperform it for 2023. But these kind of questions, I don't give a very satisfying answer, because we're not speculators. I can't say whether the NASDAQ is going to do well or whether it's going to do bad. I'm not going to pretend that I know that it's going to do it. We're momentum investors. So as long as that particular sector is doing well, we might have a position in it, but we're completely agnostic there. If S&P 500 comes back, then we'll invest in that. We don't have any sort of preference to speculating on what might do well. So I guess the short answer is I don't know.
I agree. I have no idea as well. Is that I tend to think very cynically. I'm always wondering who's pulling the levers behind the curtain to make certain industries do well when everybody else is not. I think the article stated that if we remove the 8 best performing tech stocks in the S&P 500, that the S&P would actually be in negative territory this year. That's an unhealthy position to be in. If the economy is strong, then all boats should be rising. If only a few boats are rising, that usually means that something's going on that's rather nefarious. I'm kind of interested in knowing why these companies are doing so well this year. I think there's more to it than just the speculative nature of AI.
I think the S&P 500 is capitalization weighted, so those 8 companies that Joe mentioned are the best companies in the U.S., and so rightly so that they move they move the index more than any other company was. So I don't think there's any it makes sense to me that the 8 best or the 10 best companies in the U.S. are doing most of the heavy lifting. And you're right, if you strip out those 10 best companies, the S&P 500 I think is like flat to negative for the year, and that's basically the reason why the NASDAQ 100 is outperforming so much, is because instead of having 500 other companies, or I guess 490 other companies, they only have 90 other companies that are holding it down, and those 8 companies are pushing that index higher. So it's all about how the indexes are composed, but basically you have the 10 best companies in the U.S. and everybody really likes those things, and those things right now are just pushing the ball forward. And I feel like it's kind of a time of we're coming out with, there's a lot of innovation happening. So you got like Apple just released their headset, which is fairly, it looks kind of like ski goggles, but I think but I mean, if they, over the next 4 or 5 years, I mean, I doubt it's going to be as clunky as it looks right now. And then, Tesla is making, all kinds of advances, not just necessarily in cars, but just in automation in general. And so I don't think it's any surprise that the Nasdaq is outperforming it, and I get why people are bearish on the S&P 500, bullish on the Nasdaq 100, because it's got less companies that are holding those 10 best companies back. So so we'll just move on to the next one, because that kind of fits into this conversation. Is that this week, chip maker Nvidia briefly hit the $1 trillion valuation mark. So right now, Apple's worth about 3 trillion. Nvidia just hit the $1 trillion valuation mark, thanks to investors' excitement about demand for its chips created by the so-called generative AI. So that's like ChatGPT, the technology behind ChatGPT. Smaller AI-related stocks have also soared as investors search for big winners from the latest fashionable theme. Is there already a bubble in AI stocks, or do you think? I mean, do you think this is just taking off?
So I think it's actually a little bit of both. I'm old enough to remember the .com bubble, where basically all you did was add the letters .com to the end of your company name and scream internet as loud as you can, and everybody invests in you. And then 95% of the companies that did that all imploded. So there's probably some of that going on with AI. Nvidia, they're in looking up what they're doing. They're not doing anything that any other company is going to have a particularly difficult time doing. So in investing, we call that a low or small or no moat. So basically, competition in this field is likely to be pretty high, which will drive costs down pretty quickly. But I do think it's just starting to take off, because this kind of technology has been waiting in the wings for a while, and it's just kind of waiting for its opportunity to make big changes in the economy. So if we get a forecasted recession later this year and into next, and a lot of companies start laying people off, but when these companies start growing again, they'll have the opportunity to decide whether or not, if you're a fast food chain, do you want to rehire all the people to work at the drive-through, or do you want to install a $50,000 computer in the building to take the orders for you and not have to worry about hiring workers again? So I think you're going to see a lot of that coming over the next few years. So I think both it's a bubble and this is a technology that's just starting to take off.
I guess in terms of bubble, in terms of what, you kind of have to look at the PE ratios, and you have to look at earnings. Right now, these companies, especially Nvidia, has insane PE ratios. So fundamentally, yeah, it signals that there is a bubble. Now, you also have to look at earnings, because in the .com bubble, a lot of those companies weren't turning a profit. So as long as there's demand for this AI product, there's money in the economy, people are buying it, these businesses are making money. I think it just might be the next big thing in tech. In that case, I don't think it will be a bubble. We'll probably see some volatility in the price, but it doesn't mean it's going to be anywhere near like the .com burst. So I think there's other things to watch more than just the rally in AI stocks right now.
I think this conversation is tied to the earlier conversation we had with the NASDAQ 100 doing so well. Is that I believe investors are looking into the future saying, ultimately, the ultimate winners are going to be the Big 10, because they're going to end up buying up all these other companies who are bringing all this competition to the market. This is very similar with other disruptive technologies. As they come in, you go from 1% of the population being interested to 10% of the population to 90% to 99.9%. And right now we're in the shootout, the OK corral between the 1 and the 10%. So the time where this happens is compressing with technology. Where it used to take 7 years, it might only take 18 months to 2 years now. But I think that there's going to be a lot of activity in this particular arena, and about half the people are going to make a lot of money, and about half the people are going to lose a lot of money.
Just specifically with NVIDIA, Drew's right, is that NVIDIA actually has earnings to back it up. And when you look at the semiconductors that go into ChatGPT, those things are expensive. Like you're talking like $100,000 or something like that for one of those chips, and they need like 25 of them to process like whatever Chat GPT does, and like other processors, you require the same amount. So, and right now Nvidia is pretty much the only player in the game. The problem Nvidia has though is, Apple is making its own chips, like for its headset. They're making their own chips that go into that. Tesla is making its own chip that goes into its cars and whatever robotics that they're doing. And it gets to the point where in order to like work seamlessly, these companies basically have to design their own chips to go with it. And the problem with NVIDIA, it's not like Apple where they've created this ecosystem, because they have like, your AirPods talk to your iPhone, which talks to your watch, which talks to your goggles, which talks to your computer. NVIDIA doesn't really have that ecosystem. It's like we're buying your chips because right now you're about the only one that makes them. So if Apple and Microsoft and Google all start making their own chips, they could start eating NVIDIA's lunch. But you're right. I mean, I think, the AI stuff is just getting started. And I think people kind of realize how powerful it is when they go on to like Google's Bard and start asking it some questions. It does a pretty good job. It still has quite a few limitations, but I think people kind of see where the technology is going and people are jumping into those companies that are going to be a part of it. So, but if you're going to buy NVIDIA now, I mean, man, yeah, hang on, because I mean, it's gonna be a ride, because it's got some steep valuations right now. All right. Okay, so to make batteries for electric vehicles, companies need to mine and refine large amounts of nickel. The process of getting the mineral out of the ground and turning it into a battery-ready substance, though, is particularly environmentally unfriendly. Reaching the nickel means cutting down swaths of rainforest. Refining it is a carbon-intensive process that involves extreme heat and high pressure, producing a waste slurry that's hard to dispose of. I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think people are going to overlook the fact that they have these environmental challenges to make, more cars that produce less emissions, or is this basically a showstopper for electric vehicles?
I'll do this in 2 sentences since I'm basically out of time. Environmentalism in the West has largely not solved any real problems. They've just moved the problems to the third world. We just move all these open pit mines and nasty toxic waste pits and everything to places where we can't see it anymore. So I think for the foreseeable future, there's not really any major environmental benefit to EVs. Maybe there's a future where that's the case, but for now, all we're doing is moving it to places where really poor people live and we don't get to see it.
Yeah, as long as the consumer isn't exposed to all the nasty stuff that's going into the sausage being made, I think largely they're just gonna say, "Hey, I have my EV vehicle. My sushi is it comes from sustainably sourced fish. I shop at Whole Foods. I'm good to go. I'm doing my part." But as soon as more of that exposure comes to surface, or you bring it closer to home, then I think people might start to change their minds about EV. From what I've read, it takes 2 years for an EV vehicle to break even on terms of its carbon footprint. To me, that sounds like a good investment. In the first 2 years, they've produced more carbon than a car would, or an ICE car, internal combustion engine car. But after that, it's more environmentally friendly. So in terms of that, it seems like a good investment. But this is a political game. They're going to have to deal with inconvenient truths and unintended consequences. And whoever cries the loudest to pass legislation or something like that will probably ultimately be successful in the EV world.
I was in the in Indochina in 2012, trekking around, and I saw just how there's two forces at play in the third world. You have these environmentalist NGOs, non-government organizations, who are fighting to keep the environment safe, and then you have the governments in those third world countries who are essentially destroying their own resources in pursuit of the almighty dollar. And the issue with clean energy in Western societies is that the exhaust comes right out of the back of the exhaust pipe on a car, and you see that. But the damage to the environment is done hundreds, if not thousands of miles away with clean energy. So you feel good about yourself when you're driving around your electric car while Cambodia or Africa is being destroyed. There is no free lunch. The issue is that you're going to hurt something in order for your life to be better. And I don't see this as a net gain. Drew talks about the article mentioning, it takes 2 years for the break even for environmental positives. But what we don't talk about is how do we get rid of those batteries after we're done with them? When 35 years ago, when I was in the Marine Corps, we were on the cutting edge of using lithium batteries for our radios. I had to fill out a stack of paper about that high every time I got rid of those radio batteries. It's going to be exactly the same thing with all these electric cars. We haven't even dealt with that problem yet.
Yeah. And I didn't pay attention to the clock.
I was hoping you weren't going to have any time to talk about cast iron pans, but all right.
Yeah, you got 9 seconds. All right. Hold on, my computer is frozen. Okay, there it goes. Okay, yeah, I'm out of time, so we're gonna move on here. So cast iron cookware has recently seen a resurgence. That means a rise in one of the most sizzling household debates around. Should you wash your cast iron pan or not? Alex.
Oh man, I can just relax. I thought I was going to be the only one, and I could just state my opinions, and all you guys would just have to take it. But I think we probably agree on this one, Dad. I don't use soap on my cast iron pan. I'm never going to do it. I hear that you can. I don't really care. If someone wants to wash their cast iron pan with soap, so be it. If they want to fertilize their lawn with used motor oil, so be it. But in my house, I don't use soap. I just use a plastic scrubby if I have some burnt stuff caked on there. Otherwise, I just clean it with water, paper towel. I heat it up, put some olive oil on it, and call it a day.
Don't even think. That's grounds for divorce in my house if you put soap on my cast iron.
We would be divorced because I always wash my pans with soap and water. You guys are disgusting.
Is anybody surprised?
Yeah, that flavor you get is called bacteria.
You heat the thing up to like 600 degrees. I think it's all dead.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. All right, that's it for episode 85 of Farmer Markets. We'll see you again next week.